The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasting.
Looking back, these details leave me particularly disturbed. Even now, I'd like to believe Ted's heart was somewhere in the right place, that indeed, his interest in preventing crimes, especially those against women, proved he actively sought to combat the demons he likely already knew lived inside him. Unfortunately, I'm inclined to believe that his good deeds were more deviously planned, and that his true aim was to become better acquainted with law enforcement in order to pinpoint weaknesses that he could use to his advantage. I can imagine that his study into the cases of violence against women only succeeded in arousing ideas. From Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy by Edna Cowell Martin.
And co-author Megan Atkinson.
Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. Today, I have a very special guest who will be speaking about her personal memoir. I applaud her for having the courage to write it at all. She is Edna Cowell Martin, and her book is titled Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy. Yes, that Ted Bundy. You may recall that I covered the Bundy case when I featured Elizabeth Kendall's book, The Phantom Prince, in episodes 9 to 11 in the early days of my podcast. In those episodes, I was on a mission to tear down Ted Bundy, who is often admired for his good looks, and that drove me crazy. I also discussed the young women whose lives he stole, trying to remember them for who they were rather than their tragic endings. But today is different. Today we will hear from a family member of Ted Bundy as she shares her story and insights. Imagine feeling the need to hide parts of yourself from the world, locking them away deep inside, while your heart races when the topic inadvertently comes up. I guess we all do that to some extent, and we don't reveal every aspect of ourselves to everyone we meet. We have audience-specific filters. However, this experience takes on a different meaning when you are related to an infamous serial killer. You never know how others might react to the information, and you can't be certain if a family member or friend of the victim is in that room. This is how Edna Cowell Martin, our author, felt much of her life. Edna was born into the Cowell family and is Ted Bundy's cousin. His mother, Louise, is Edna's first cousin. Louise Cowell Bundy was the daughter of Sam Cowell. His much younger brother, with 20 years between them, named John, is Edna's father. So as a result, John and Louise were only a few years apart in age and were close, almost like siblings. This family connection meant that Edna's life would be intertwined with that of Ted Bundy, who she regarded as a big brother. Louise Cowell gave birth to Ted out of wedlock in the 1940s, which was a challenging situation at the time. John Cowell, who was already living in Tacoma, suggested that Louise relocate from Philadelphia to Washington State. Wanting a fresh start, Louise agreed, taking 4-year-old Ted with her. Consequently, Ted and Edna grew up together and frequently hung out, even during the period when Ted was committing his crimes. In her book, Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy, Edna explores many insights into her experiences during this time, shedding light on how the, air quotes, normal Ted Bundy interacted with friends and family versus Ted when the murderous dark tide rose up within him, and how his legacy impacted her and her family. So today, I want to warmly welcome Edna Cowell Martin to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. Hi, Edna. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here, Jill.
I'm so glad.
Did you get a chance to see the documentary? Well, it first appeared on Oxygen a couple weeks ago, and then on Peacock, and it's now out on YouTube. It's called Love, Ted Bundy.
No.
I was in front of the camera while they were working on it 9 hours until they honed it down. The incredible producer, Marwar Productions, and the showrunner was Chris Castle, his Emmy award winning, and the photographer's Emmy award winning. And I mean, they did an amazing job. And they came out here and spent a week in this area. So I live not anywhere near Long Branch now. I mean, it's about an hour drive from where I am, but I'm directly west of Seattle and in a little Norwegian village on the water. And so they came out here and stayed in, we have a very nice hotel here, and rented this incredible place. Everybody thinks it's my place. And I think, well, maybe I shouldn't dissuade them from that, but it's,
It's okay, right?
yeah, it's a pretty nice place, but they did a stunning job on it. I'm so pleased with what they did. And it centers a lot around the letters that Ted and I wrote back and forth to each other. So that is kind of the star of the show, is the letters, and then everything sort of emanates around that. But they did a really good job.
I usually keep up with my documentaries because inevitably they come up or there's something going on, or someone will write me an email and ask me what I thought of such and such, and I missed that one.
Well, that's understandable. But if you get a chance to watch it, I think you should.
As soon as we're done here, I'm going to go right off and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that if I weren't pleased with it. You never know, what you're getting into. This particular crew, I mean, we had been approached by quite a few different people, and we chose them specifically for the quality of work they did and their sensitivity to not only to me, but to the victims,
Yes.
which was the main thing that I wanted to be sure that we took care of those and didn't exploit the people that were brutally murdered by Ted, and as well as sensitivity to their families and things like that.
I think that's phenomenal. You're talking about Love, Ted Bundy, which you said focused on the letters.
Yes.
And I want to talk about the letters. But I want to ask you, do you think the way they're approaching documentaries these days are more victim-centric and sensitive?
Well, here's the irony. I agreed to do this documentary because I've been wanting to tell my story, but I do not watch a lot of true crime because I feel like I've been through it, maybe tangentially with my association with Ted Bundy, but it's really hard for me to watch these. And I think a lot of them do a good job with the victims, but others not so well. So you're always concerned about that. Absolutely.
Yes, I agree. Some have been very good, and some I just cringe. I'm very much about respecting the families, the victims, and the perpetrators' families. A lot of time there is a lot of reaction against the families, and it's like, hey, they didn't do anything.
No, they didn't. And I feel the same way. Of course, I'm a family member. I didn't have anything to do with it. But even closer are, his mom and his siblings. And what they went through was hell. Just absolute hell. Because they did not know either. And they never, ever could have believed it at first. Like, just as none of us did. It did not even mesh with the person that we knew Ted to be. And that's how successful psychopaths are. They're very good. Apparently, I've learned this from having this close association of successfully being more than one person and being able to manipulate those that are close by them as well as their victims. But he was really good at being somebody completely different around me and my friends and his family.
You did speak of that one time the mask slipped, and that was frightening. You lived it, and I could feel it.
Are you referring to the time that he was dancing? That time?
Yes.
Oh, it's because there was another well, it seems like dancing is all involved in these things, but Ted did not live very far from me. I went to the University of Washington, and I lived in an apartment just maybe about a 15-minute walk from campus. And he was about 6 minutes away walking from me, which for my parents, when I had moved back to finish up my education we had moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, where my dad was a professor there. So I went through high school and 2 years of college there. So I was thrilled to be coming back to Seattle. And my parents were really comforted by the fact that Ted lived just a few blocks from me. You can imagine. Because then if I needed anything, he'd be within a moment's notice, literally. And he often walked by or dropped in. And back in those days, of course, we did not have cell phones and ways to get in touch with each other easily. So people did drop by. And he one time came by and knocked on the door, and we looked out the window, and he kind of waved up because we were on the second floor of this little apartment building. And so we let him in, and we were extremely happy to see him coming because he had a bag of groceries with him. And we were starving college students and literally living on hand to mouth because we would have to go out and get extra jobs in order just to eat. But he came with a bag of groceries and a bottle of wine, which was especially appreciated. And we fixed dinner, and my roommate was there as well, Margie. So when we finished eating, we put on records, and I probably had 100 different albums, just everything. We loved music, still do. And we started dancing around the living room, and I had turned to put another record on the record player, and it had started off with a bit of a slower song. And so when I turned back, I saw that Margie and Ted were sort of slow dancing, and she had her head just kind of leaning against him. And I saw that he was looking down at her. And then as I looked more closely, the look on his face really startled me. It wasn't what I expected at all, Jill. He was looking down at her, and his jaw was clenched, and he looked different, really mean. And he scared me. His eyes were blue, and they had gone completely black. And I didn't know that this was a phenomena before with people. And I've heard of since then by talking to psychiatrists and things, when people get into a state of excitation, their pupils dilate. I had no idea. I did not know that. I did not understand what was going on with him. I thought something was wrong with him, and it completely unnerved me. So I yelled out to him. I said, "Hey, Ted, are you okay?" Why would I think that unless something was really off? And I had to yell because the music was kind of loud, and I turned off the music, and I said, "Hey, Ted, are you okay?" Because he was in a trance. And Margie had no idea. And so they both stopped. She looked up at him to see what was going on, and then looked at me. And then it was all of a sudden, it was as if his whole face changed, and he sort of shook his head, snapped out of it, looked at me with a smile, and just said, oh, everything is fine. And I went, okay, because that was weird. You looked like you were someplace else completely. He goes, oh no, it was okay. But it was really spooky. He looked very scary. And that it was just a few moments after that, maybe within 5 minutes, that he abruptly left.
Yeah.
And we were surprised at how quickly he just said, okay, I gotta go. And he was out the door. And I have no idea where he went after that. And I have never been able to determine if anything happened to anybody after he left. Not that I can identify, but it was really a side of him that I'd never seen before. And I didn't really think that much of it at the time, but it made an impression on me. And it was as soon as I got his attention, that, there was a mask that he would put back on for us of this sort of normal person.
In hindsight, now you have context or what was likely going on there. But at the time, okay, he thought something, got in a bad mood, something occurred to him, he forgot something. I mean,
Right.
You shrug it off to normal things. You don't think, he's going to go out and kill someone. It never crosses your mind.
No,
Never.
Not at all. Exactly. Why would you even suspect that? You hit that nail on the head. I just thought that was weird, but I never forgot it. And
Right.
interesting thing too is, Margie and I have talked about is she never saw it because by the time I caught his attention and they stopped dancing and she looked up, he looked normal again. But the thought that she was in his arms right then and he was looking down at her like that really upset me. It still gives me shivers.
I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. I said it was powerful reading because, again, when you're reading now, you have the luxury of hindsight. You have that, the context. You can put yourself in this situation marginally and you know what it means. You didn't know what it meant at that point. You just know whatever. Okay.
Could have been any number of things, Somebody just lost in thought. Very intense, mean-looking thought, but definitely lost in thought. And you're right. It didn't occur to me until after, and we're talking some years later, after he was arrested and we started to have overwhelming evidence, that I started going back and looking at things and looking at them with a completely different light and point of view and going, oh, wow, what about that instance? Because nothing at the time seemed significant enough to even take note of, just like you said.
I have to tell you, in every serial killer case that I've delved into, and 40 years, I've got my murder shelf is filled with books on serial killers. I don't tell this to too many people. Kidding. When a person has been arrested, nobody has said, oh, thank God, I thought there was something wrong with him. Nobody.
That right?
Now, I'm going to say nobody. There's probably that one guy somewhere in the annals of serial crime. But nobody says, oh, yeah, he did it. No, the response is always, what? No way. No, the police have made a mistake. The police have made a mistake every time because they are that good.
Yeah, that's what makes it so unnerving, Jill, is because these people are so adept at this deception that the people even that are the closest to them, they cannot detect it. And that, how do you protect yourself against something like that? I don't know what to say other than just don't willfully, go away with somebody without taking time to get to know them. But even those of us who got to know him really well didn't know him really well.
Yeah.
And that just included lots and lots of layers of people, all the way down to his closest family members, to his professors, to his co-workers, to an investigative reporter, Richard Larson, who worked with him a lot down in, our capital in Olympia. I just met another reporter that worked for another major newspaper in Washington State that had a lot of interaction with him. No clue. To the governor of our state at that time, very popular governor, Dan Evans, who wrote him a letter of recommendation for law school. So from all these different people, and the tragedy is that here was a young man who was accomplishing a lot in politics and lots of levels of law enforcement associations doing things. He was volunteering at Harborview, which is a huge trauma center here in Seattle. Grey's Anatomy is based on it. And he was, as a psychology student, he was doing a lot of stuff. I mean, here is a guy who had all this potential and he just could not control this other aspect of his personality. It eventually took over.
Yeah. I read a book recently and talked with the investigator. And the phrase that struck me was pathology trumps intellect.
Mm.
And you go, oh, why do people who have worked hard, have it all, the family, the fame, the money, the success, blow it? Because pathology will trump intellect.
I like that.
Every time.
Writing that down. That's really good.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I said, okay, I'm adopting that. Boom, 3 little words. And it just explains so much when you think of it that way. That pathology was dominant. He could control it and mask it. He could not deal with it. It's a compulsion of some sort.
It is. It was. And it got more and more powerful. I thought it was, as we were researching this with my fabulous co-author, Megan Atkinson, who has kind of the same sort of ethic I do in terms of research and accuracy. Not that we couldn't make a mistake, but we kept learning more and more about him. And then as, the time that he finally got arrested from Utah to the time he escaped twice. Can you imagine that you're harboring and incarcerating and jailing this potentially horrific murderer, and you allow him to escape twice?
Yeah.
But that still, Don and I, my husband Don and I, we still talk about that because we just want to pull our hair out going, how could people be so incompetent? But anyway, that he had all this stuff, this pent up stuff. So before he was kind of stealthily picking out his victims and able to pick them off without anybody seeing him. And then when he finally escaped from the Colorado jail and went to Tallahassee and did the rampage at the Chi Omega sorority house, it was like he had this built up frenzy that he had to get out of his system. I mean, he just went nuts.
Yes, I did the research too. He was incarcerated for 3.5 years. Did the escape in June in 1977 and then escaped December 30th. Flight staff, holiday season. He's losing weight, so he can shimmy out through the ceiling hole into the next apartment and walked out the door and winds up in Florida. So that was December 30th. He makes it barely 2 weeks.
Yeah, I know. And what really, really upsets me too about that escape was he had, I believe, about $700 on him, which is a lot of money. If you look at that in $1978, I think it was 1978, that's probably more like several $1,000s today, with inflation and all that kind of stuff. People were getting him a lot of money. I don't know where he got it all, but
yeah. He has fans. He still has fans.
And that's something else I don't understand. It's crazy. And how he was able to figure out how to escape up through a vent in the ceiling. I mean, he was very, very smart, unfortunately for a lot of people.
Yeah, he was clever. Listen, he even fooled the guards because they weren't on high alert. It's Ted, That's how he got out the first time, jumped out the law library window.
That's right.
And even knowing that, he was still able to lull them into this sense of security that, I'm here. Okay. Until he wasn't.
Right. And the night before he escaped, he called me.
Yes.
So he calls me, and it's actually in the afternoon because I remember it was still daylight. And it gets dark here early in December, so I know that it wasn't too late in the afternoon. And I have a little 1-year-old that's kind of crawling around on the floor around me, and I pick up the phone, and it's surprise, it's my cousin Ted. And I haven't heard from him. I haven't heard his voice now since December of 1975. I was shocked to hear his voice, and so I didn't know what to think. Okay, why is he calling me? And, we were buddies and friends, so I'm thinking, well, he just wants this opportunity to talk to me. But the gist of the phone call was he wanted to know what I would think if he tried to escape. So after some nice little other conversation, which was just filler for this big question. And I remember thinking, well, that's a shocking question. I said, no, Ted, that's a terrible idea. Because you know what happened the last time you did this, which was June, and he had dropped out of the window, as you suggested. I think he hurt his ankle in the drop, and then ended up almost freezing in the mountains, even though it was June. But I said, how'd that go for you? And I said, didn't go very well. And I said, besides, you tell me that you have a good case, because at the beginning of the conversation, he was telling me that he had a really good chance to beat this. They didn't have the evidence or whatever it was that he was feeling confident about. And I said, so why would you jeopardize that because I was still hoping in the back of my mind that he hadn't done this thing too, this awful thing he was being accused of. But I was very, very leery of him, and I was also afraid of him at this point and very concerned about him. And I was figuring then that I did not know him. He wasn't who I thought he was. But I also assumed that he was being listened in on by whoever his minders were, that he was just kind of yanking my chain. I didn't know at that time that because he was participating in his own defense, that he had certain, leeway in terms of making private phone calls. So this call was not monitored, but I did not know that at the time.
Unbelievable.
And then in talking to my brother afterwards, I found out he also called my brother John with the same question, except he had one additional question, which was, well, what are the worst states for the death penalty? And my brother is just this brain that click, click. He goes, oh, well, he also told him, he said, well, I hope you're not thinking about doing this. And Ted says, oh, no, I just was curious. And John told him, well, the worst states are Texas and Florida. You don't want to go to either one of those states, but it's not going to happen, right, Ted? We both said that. And that was the shock and horror to find out it wasn't 24 hours. It was about 36 hours later. So it was the morning of January 1st. We were awakened very early. We were still asleep. So it must have been about 6 a.m. by pounding on our door. And we were staying in this little trailer out not far from Long Branch. And because we had been in this beautiful house that Dawn had built for this woman, and we had to scramble to find another place to live. And that was the only place we could find. And it turned out that was the FBI at the door. 2 men.
Oh, my God.
And they knew that Ted had called us. And so they were, pounding on the door. We were worried they would wake up our baby, whose first birthday was on that day.
Yes.
So we kind of stepped outside with them. It was cold, January 1st. And then they proceeded to tell us that Ted had escaped and to strongly urge us not to aid and abet him in any way. And we had no intention of doing that. In fact, my husband was so incensed by everything that he'd been doing. He said that if he tries to come here, I will fight him to the death.
I understand.
Yeah. And he proceeded to conceal all kinds of possible weapons. We did not own a firearm because we had a little baby that was learning to walk. But he hid a hatchet, knives, and all kinds of other things, not where she could reach them, but in different parts of the trailer as well as outside. So that wherever he was, if Ted showed up, he'd have access to something. He says, even though Don was an ex-Marine and trained in hand-to-hand combat, and he was in superb shape at that time, he says, I don't have his brain, his psychopathic brain. He says, right. I don't have that, sensibility of just having no empathy. He said, yeah. So I don't know if somebody like that could pull something on me by trying to put me at ease and then out of the blue, attack me. So he said, I was ready. I was just going to tell him not to get within 20 feet of where I was standing. Otherwise I would have to defend myself. It was a frightening time because then at night we had to barricade ourselves in.
Oof.
And Don literally put 2x4s to block the door so it couldn't be, bashed open. All kinds of stuff. We were really scared.
I cannot fathom how you got through this because he was gone 47 days.
Yeah. And we didn't know where he was going. And we knew that he liked to come to where I was. And so we weren't sure what to expect. So he finally, it was a holiday because of January 1st. My husband had to go back to work. And so then I couldn't stay alone at the trailer. So we're living on Puget Sound and we have friends that have a boat. So almost every day I would go over to their boat where they were living on the boat at the time. Beautiful boat. And then we would just cast off and we would be out in the middle of Puget Sound. And boy, that's the safest feeling I've ever had. Nobody could come get even close to us without them being seen. So
Yeah. The unknown.
the unknown.
There's a shark in the water. Where? Oh my God.
Yeah. Where?
Where did he go? And no one knew. I don't think he would have gone to the Northwest because he was just notorious. And
Right.
so I can see why you were saying he did the complete opposite and went to Florida. I have to ask you, because I remember reading this, that you were saying that he asked your brother, and what are the worst states for the death penalty? And he said Florida, and Ted shows up in Florida.
Right.
I don't think he liked being in jail. I think he knew he did this, so chances are pretty good. Because, again, he reveals himself. He calls you up and asks you about escaping, but I've got a really good case. No, he's more intelligent than that. He was calling up because he didn't have a really good case, because he knew they were going to have the evidence. He knew he was going down. The game was up, and he had no other choice but to try to create a new identity and go someplace else. And you're a comfy spot, so he called you.
Right. So back then, jurisdictions, police jurisdictions, law enforcement jurisdictions, there was no way to share information between the different places, between Washington, between Utah, between Colorado, between, whatever. And so my other theory, and Megan and I talked a lot about this, and I'm sure other people have figured this out as well, but that's about as far away as you can get from the state of Washington. And so a lot of people there didn't know anything about him.
Right.
And so there was not, it was like you said, coming to the Pacific Northwest. Now we know that would probably have been his last choice, but we did not know that at the time. But,
Right.
but that would be the place to go. Yeah, because nobody would know about it. Not even the news. News was not shared. There was just not this form of communication. We didn't have any of this social media that we have now, where every information is available everywhere. I was doing a presentation for a book club, and we had a huge crowd. And we had a very interesting forensic scientist there who worked in the Seattle crime laboratory back then. He said we didn't even have really good way to process DNA. It was a very laborious process then. And he said, and we were not at that point sharing information with another jurisdiction. He says, what Ted did back then, he probably couldn't have pulled off today. He would have been caught probably a lot sooner, is my point. But back then, it was much easier. For example, just after he escaped and he made his way, I believe, to Denver to catch a plane, there was no TSA. He didn't have to produce any kind of identification. He could pay cash.
Yeah, and just get on the plane. People can't believe it when I tell them this. And I've said, no. Back in the day, cruise ships used to go out. The families used to go on board and see the cabins and hang out with the families. And then you'd get off and you'd wave goodbye. But I remember, today, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you practically have to give them a retinal scan.
Yeah, and that's true. Because we took a cruise when I was 6 years old, crossed the Atlantic, and a bunch of relatives came on board. We have pictures of them in our cabin,
Yes.
all saying hi, goodbye, and then they left. So you're right. It's so much more controlled now, for good and bad, but mainly good, keeps people a lot safer.
Well, we've gone through a series of lacking imagination, which has led to tragedies, catastrophes, explosions, death. So we have gotten a little bit more imaginative ourselves in how we have to protect and defend to prevent these things from happening. And every time something happens, we tweak the list and things we have to do. And it's just the way it is. It's sad. It's a sad commentary on life, but you try to stay ahead of whatever pathology is going to rear its head.
Yeah, it's all he can do. One of my grandson's friends flew up to visit him from another state, and we had to go out to the gate to meet up with him. And what we had to go through just to go to the gate as non-flying passengers, was completely as if we were going through the whole process, and it was a big deal. We had to go through special lines and had to explain what we were doing and prove that we were actually meeting a minor child. So
Yeah.
it is much more onerous, but it's for our protection.
Yeah. I try to remember that when I'm on the line and my feet hurt and my back hurts and, I'm grumbling. Now I'm getting hungry. I have to go to the bathroom. I'm still on line going through security. And it's like, this is keeping me safe. You can do this for 5 more minutes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things you talk about is the death penalty.
Yeah.
And how you are against the death penalty. And I completely respect that. But I'm stuck with the death penalty because I defer to victims' families and victims. What they want, that's what they get, as far as I'm concerned. But I also know the value of being able to use that threat to coerce confessions, information. We'll take it off the table if you tell us what happened, blah, blah, blah. And I actually think that's where Ted was trying to get at the end, when he's starting to talk, well, can we have stays of execution and all this? But I don't think he was the genius attorney he thought he was going to be, and got himself jammed up badly. There are certainly other cases in dealing with serial murder where that's been the case and they've gotten information.
Yeah.
So can we just keep it on the books just as leverage? If we never actually execute anybody, can we just keep it there? I'm watching the Rex Heuermann case, the Long Island serial killer in New York. And New York it's on the books, but there's nothing to get that man to talk.
I see.
Nothing.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about it as well. I've never been a big proponent of it because I think it's been used for a lot more minorities and not fairly, and there's been innocent people that have been put to death. And it kind of makes me very uneasy knowing that the state has the control that they can go out and kill somebody too. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other hand, I can totally understand why people would be for the death penalty when they have monsters like this. In Ted's case, they still did not know where he left some of the remains, his victims. And so I felt like there was still unanswered questions about where these young women still were. So their families never had a chance to, bury their daughters.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really upset that he went before those questions could be answered.
I understand that too. I said, it's such a difficult question, which is, like I said, why I defer to families.
I totally agree. So that was my thoughts about it is that it's been unequally, implemented for one thing. And then for another thing, in Ted's case, that we weren't done. And also perhaps we could have learned, what makes a person like that tick.
Yes.
Those were some of my thoughts at the time. I know that there's people out there that just say, just pull the plug. And I understand it. But these are my thoughts. And that's why I hesitate, because there was a lot left to find out.
I agree. No, I have to agree there. I hate to use that word closure, but having that information, what happened, where your person is, the unknown. Just talked about the unknown, how powerful that can be. And that's still hanging out there for families, and it's heartbreaking for them.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I mean, their families to this day are still suffering, the victims' families. So what do you do for them? I don't know. Only time, I suppose, will help, but still there's this awful stuff. And then so many people write books about serial killers, and so it's hard not to resent them for doing that when they're exploiting these family members to some degree. So that was always in the back of my mind and something I was really concerned about, because that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk about this from the point of view of a family member, that we are real people who were also nowhere near the level of victims of his victims and the families, but we were still traumatized by what he did as well in a very profound way. And it's
Yes.
a very tough position to be in. I did not want anybody to know that I was related to Ted Bundy, that he was my cousin. And you say, well, cousin, that's not as close as a sibling. That's right. But he and I were really good friends, and we hung out a lot and did stuff together. And I totally trusted him. I rode around alone with him in that infamous VW Beetle, the Bug, and spent time alone with him on many, many occasions. And when you think back on that, that's just gives me chills to think that I completely unconditionally trusted someone who was the very epitome of the most terrifying type of individual that I could have ever known. I couldn't even imagine at that time how evil somebody could have been.
Especially your proximity. You hope that you would recognize, but they don't show you.
No, they don't. And I exposed him to my friends, so I fretted over that. One of his very first victims in the Seattle area was a very close friend of one of my roommates, one of their best friends. And so when Linda Ann Healy disappeared, we were all just totally freaked out, wondering what happened to her. And everybody was really worried at first, and then starting to be very terrified, and then suffering because they started to realize when she was gone for days and days that this was possibly something bad, and it did turn out to be that way. The nicest girl. She did the Saturday morning ski report. I think she did a ski report every morning, and we were all snow skiers. So we would listen to our buddy do the snow ski report, and then those stopped, we missed. This is just the tragedy of what happens when somebody decides that they are a god and that they can decide life or death over somebody.
Yeah, exactly. I'm so sorry. I wish I had better words. I'm just sorry you all had to go through that. Was it hard to decide to write the book? Because for years you were like, no, thank you. No, we'll be anonymous. Thank you very much. Exactly. But you said you wanted to also talk about Ted.
Yeah. For a long time, I successfully buried it. And I found out by doing this project and talking to a lot of people who are psychologists and lots of interesting people that I've met, that it's not a good idea to bury things that are traumatic. You need to get them out of your system. And this was one of those things that I buried it, but for some reason it kept trying to resurrect itself. And I knew that I had a story to tell. I had hidden from it for 50 years. And I got to a point where I really wanted to get it out of my system. I wanted to, as I say in my book, I wanted to exorcise him like he was a demon, get that out of my system. And I've been in advertising for years, and I'd done a ton of just ad writing. And whenever anything upsetting happened to me, I'd always sit down and I'd write, pages and pages. And that felt really good to do that. So I sat down and I wrote an 18, 20 page sort of pitch. But before I did that, I was out walking with my daughter, and she and I would have had this tradition since she was a pretty young girl, where we would go out and we would walk. And there's something about walking where you're facing forward and you can kind of unburden yourself, and the other person's not kind of looking right at you with a judgy look. And we've gotten a lot of things out of our systems walking together. So, and this was during COVID, which is kind of a cliche, but we were all isolating. And so we walked, we were on an island doing a beautiful walk together. And I just kind of blurted out, I said, I need to talk about Ted. And she just stopped dead in her track because I had never really brought him up. And it was always a subject that was taboo. I found out afterwards that a lot of my nieces and nephews knew that I was related to him, but they were all counseled never to ask me about it. Parents were all trying to protect me. So she was sort of in that situation as well. And she goes, okay, well, why do you think you need to do it now? I said, I don't know. I just need to get him out of my system. And I have a story to tell. And I want to tell it. I was coming up to my 70th birthday, which, by the way, that's kind of a big deal. In case everybody out there, you kind of party and have a great time, and then you get to 70, you go, oh my God, really? But anyway, so I felt like I wanted to talk about it before I forgot it, in case, something happened to my brain. You never know. And I said, but I'm not really sure how to go about this. And my daughter is one of those people that's a connector. She knows a lot of people. She's high up with, was all these big tech firms, and she had tons of connections, and she knew a publicist, and she said, let's talk to her. And she's the one that recommended that I write a book. And then I said, this is a big deal. I had put together this nearly 20-page pitch, and I wasn't sure that anybody would be interested. Isn't that funny, Jill? I kind of thought, well, is there story here? Is there really enough here that might interest anybody? I wasn't convinced there was.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt so good writing it that I thought, well, it doesn't matter because I've gotten this whole thing out of my system. And the publicist looked at it and she goes, oh my God, yes, you have a story to tell it. And she said, start off by writing a book first, because then you can control the story.
I was just going to say, if you're writing the book, you are writing the words. You have someone work with you to make it flow and, organize the material. Then you're in control.
You're in control. And then they took my pitch. And also I said, I would love it if I had, a co-author, somebody that I could write back and forth with, because then that would be just great. And then we can stimulate each other. And I got so lucky because she recommended Megan Atkinson, who is a screenwriter for Sony, Disney, Netflix, just such a talented writer. And we completely clicked. And we wrote Dark Tide, growing up with Ted Bundy. And it was just this great symbiotic relationship. So the writing process was amazing and one of the best experiences I've ever had, and felt so good to get my story out. And I'm amazed at how much I could remember. And my husband, Don, had met Ted and had been through a lot of the things with me. And he's got a really good memory too. So both of us hadn't lost our marbles yet. And I think we're still okay now, but it was good to get it down before that all dissipates, Yeah, Don is closing in on 80, and you would never know it with his quick mind, but you just never know how much longer you're going to remember things in the past.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things anyone who reads your book is going to love is Don's jury duty story.
Oh,
you don't have to share it here. They're going to have to buy the book to know what I'm talking about. That's simple. It's a fantastic story.
So he dictated that whole thing to me. So I'm sitting with a laptop out in the living room, and I can type as fast as somebody can talk. And so I'm just madly typing it down as he's telling me the story. And that's pretty much his words right there in that section.
Well, I know he's not a letter writer as well.
No, not in the least. He's a naughty boy in that department. Yeah, he's not good.
Yeah.
But he's good at telling stories.
Yeah.
So it's torture for him to write because he's left-handed and dyslexic, and it just doesn't work for him. But he's great at storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that came through. That absolutely came through. It's absolutely marvelous. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was a good story. And then Anna's story, too. She had a story, that was pretty much hers as well in there. That was a story as well. So everybody was pretty much involved.
I think that helps in writing that and going through that process and kind of unburdening and digging all of that out. It was probably worth years and like thousands of dollars of therapy.
Thousands of dollars of therapy. And just writing is such a great exercise. If you're into writing, some people journal. I periodically have done that, but not so much. But Ted did not control my life. He did not make me have an unhappy life at all. I'm a very optimistic, upbeat person. I had great times. He did not impose on me all the time. But the thing is, I could never get away from him because he's a pop icon,
Mm-hmm.
So every time his name would come up, I would have a physical reaction. I would get just like a jolt, as if I'd stuck my finger in a socket. That's how much it upset me. And I found out since that that's kind of a low level of PTSD, just
Mhm.
and I couldn't talk about him to anybody. I didn't want anybody to know. And then even if I tried to, the few people that I would tell, I would stutter because I just didn't know how to get it out to admit to this. But I've had to do so many interviews since then that now I can talk about it just fine without stuttering. And that's in its own form, great therapy is just talking about things.
Thank you for that. I agree with you. Talking and understanding that, I hope I'm not coming across as a ghoul, but I am interested in understanding what people are going through in these situations. And I think generally there's a big heart in true crime, that people are empathetic, they sympathize, they find ways to relate to people. But there is also a side where they're very judgmental.
Mm.
They speculate and really can do some damage. And I think it's important to respect the families, whether they're victims, perpetrators, whoever. People who are involved in this, who did not commit any kind of crime and are just sucked into a vortex, do not need to have the true crime community jump all over them. And I give my voice to that. I hope that's helping with that.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. A case in point, one of the reasons why we hid out when everything hit the fan when he was captured in Florida was it turned into a media frenzy at that time. And then the really, really, really crazy time was the countdown to the execution. And I mean, news companies from all over the world set up in hotels near the penitentiary in Stark, Florida, wherever they could be, with, taking over floors of hotels and beaming the information all over the world about this coming up. I mean, it was insane. And it was insane here in Washington State because they were so happy that this guy was going to, be fried, literally. And they would, I'd be listening to the local radio stations. They'd go out in the street to talk to people, and it was a festive atmosphere. They were celebrating but then people would say things that just would really get to me that, that I hope his family fries too, and just saying really negative things about the family. Not everybody, but some people. And I heard that on the radio, and I'm thinking, I had nothing to do with this, and neither did his mom, I mean, just hearing that setting.
Yeah. That's what I mean. And these people are making a choice. I'm sorry, I don't celebrate anybody's death.
Yeah.
Is it involving justice? Okay.
Yeah.
That's what the penalty is. That's what juries decide. I respect that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to celebrate anybody's death. I don't need that kind of bad karma. Thank you. Not me. I mean, people, you go do you, but I'd keep that in mind. That's not going to be on my legacy.
Right. But, we do feel like Ted used us. He used my husband. He wanted to go out with Dawn to find out where students from another university in Seattle called Seattle University, where they hung out. And so he took Ted to some bars where they hung out. And he worried about that ever since then, that he may have inadvertently exposed somebody to Ted. And now it doesn't appear that any of those students were attacked, but you never know.
It was on his mind.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was because, when they got to the bar, and my brother was with them too, Dawn wanted to play pool or pinball machines or do some fun stuff. And Ted wasn't interested. He just wanted to look. Dawn said he was scanning back and forth, just looking at the crowd and at people.
Well, he's hunting.
He was hunting.
Yeah. Don wants to play pinball, and Ted's hunting. I mean, they're on completely different pages, and that is not Don's fault.
No. And he knows that on an intellectual level. But after all this stuff went down, he started worrying about that. You just can't help it.
No.
You don't want to have anything to do with helping him, achieve his goal. I mean, he took me out dancing to a dance club called the Windjammer, which is just right by a big marina down on Puget Sound. And the same kind of thing happened. He was not paying attention to me at all. And he was just scanning, sort of rocking back and forth. scanning the dancers and looking at all the people there with that same clenched jaw, and just, he didn't look happy at all or content.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a very peculiar situation, and I tried to distract him, and then he'd momentarily snap out of it and look at me and say, "Oh, hi, Edna," and then boom, he'd be gone again, just scanning back and forth. And I thought, later, looking back, he was just using me as a little tool to, legitimize his hunting.
I'm normal.
Yeah.
I'm out with family. We're just socializing here. No, he's hunting.
Hunting.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Well, I know it's not my fault. It's just that he's the one, it's just awful to know someone that is that evil, and know that he got away with it for quite a while, and he caused such a trail of grief and agony. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody lost.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we should cover before we wrap up?
Well, a couple things. Number one, I just want to remind all the young people out there to have situational awareness. I'm an avid walker, and a lot of these young kids are out, walking to school with their backpacks and their earbuds in, and they can't hear anybody coming up behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it over and over and over again. And I've even said, "Hey, hi," and they don't even respond because they don't hear me. And you're just setting yourself up. I'm saying 99% of the time, you're going to be fine. But that 1% of the time, if there's somebody out there with bad intentions, you have no idea. Check behind you. Just be aware. I don't want you to, live your life in fear, but have situational awareness.
Absolutely.
And that to me is just the biggest thing. And trust, but don't be deceived. Make sure you're just not wholeheartedly trusting someone. Make sure you know what's behind the mask. And you can do that by just spending some time to get to know this person and not being alone with them necessarily when they're brand new, because they'd be very charming. And,
charming for me is a red flag. Don't be charming to me. Back off.
Yeah.
I feel really bad for people who are just wonderful and charming, but I also know that is a big red flag for some people. So
yeah. So just be careful. There's just things you can do just to make sure you're safe.
Yeah, don't take it for granted. You're right. Get those earbuds out.
Or at least just have one in. So you can still hear with the other ear, but be sure you can check behind you every once in a while, just to make sure nobody's following you. It's just as simple, ABCs of taking, being safe. I had this incredible interview by some New York City detectives out of, who have a podcast. And we got into the weeds on that subject. They said they would just, if there was anything that they could get across, it would be that message about, situational awareness and checking around you. Trust your gut, but your gut isn't 100% either.
Yes.
So you gotta use some other techniques to make sure things are safe.
I agree with you 100%. Edna, we are on the same page. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a great conversation.
Really has. I'm so happy to have met you. It's wonderful.
Yes, you too. I appreciate it. And everybody, you have to go out and buy Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy by Edna Cowell Martin.
And there is the documentary too, Love, Ted Bundy. It's on Oxygen, it's on Peacock, and it's also on YouTube.
Yes, please check that out as well. I haven't watched it yet. Do you believe it? I know.
You're a busy lady.
You'll watch it. Get by.
You'll watch it. I know you will.
Absolutely. All right, then I'll say goodbye to you, and I will be in touch. And thank you so much. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your honesty.
You're welcome. And I really enjoyed talking to you, too. You had some great observations and some great questions. So it made it very interesting and worthwhile. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a stellar conversation with Edna Cowell Martin. That was a stellar conversation with Edna Cowell Martin about her amazingly brave book, Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy. I have links on my blog at murdershelfbookclub.com, May 2026. Thank you for listening. I am gearing up for CrimeCon Las Vegas 2026. It is coming up quickly. Check out my merch at www.jusaskjan.com. Just ask Jan. She is incredible, and you will just love her. And she does a whole bunch of other podcasts you may have heard of. Zone 7 with Cheryl McCollum, Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan, Gold Shields, and True Crime with the Sarge, Joe Jackalon's podcast. I truly appreciate you joining me on this journey through some of the best true crime books and the cases that matter so much. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with friends and family. And CrimeCon Las Vegas is coming up quick. And our CrimeCon meetup is Thursday, May 28th, right after the kickoff party in the lobby bar at 10 p.m. local time. And after that, I will be on Creators Row all weekend with tons of cool swag. I'm looking forward to meeting you and reconnecting. Always trust your gut. I see you as you hear me. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.